Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so you never miss a story, and drop a comment below to tell me which gangster documentary you want to see in the next video. The first time you saw him, you wouldn't have thought twice. An old man on a Harlem corner, fedora low, newspaper folded on his knee. He didn't fidget, didn't cough, didn't even blink more than he had to. Just sat there, broad and still, like a statue no one remembered placing. People walked by, mothers dragging kids, cabbies grabbing coffee, young punks trying to look tough, but none of them looked at him long. The ones who knew better didn't dare. They gave him a nod, a quick one, and kept moving. That was Anthony Salerno. Fat Tony. A name he never liked, but a name that stuck the way nicknames in this life always do. He didn't argue with it. He didn't argue with much. You live longer that way. The street was his theater. He knew every sound, every smell, every rhythm. The hiss of the bus brakes, the thump of dice in the alley, the wet scrape of a broom across pavement. On cold mornings, the roasted chestnut smoke hung low. On wet nights, rain streaked down glass storefronts, turning neon signs into bleeding colors. The city never stopped whispering, and Tony never stopped listening. Go slow, he always told Mikey, his driver. The city tells you things if you don't race past it. And it did. On every block, he read the stories in people's shoulders. A man by the payphone rubbed his palms inside his coat pockets, nervous. A grocer locked his door too fast, trouble behind him. A cab circled twice before finding a spot, someone waiting, someone watching. To Tony, silence was a language, and Harlem spoke it fluently. He grew up in those same blocks. East Harlem, tenement walls that sweated in summer and froze in winter. His father's hands always red from the bakery. His mother humming while she stirred sauce, oven door open to keep the cold out. Rent was never easy. Money never came clean. A boy learned fast. He learned when to talk, when to shut up, and how to stand so still that the room forgot he was even there. That's how he found the numbers game. His cousin ran slips behind a fish market, collecting envelopes from janitors, housewives, old men with shaky hands. It was a machine, money in, money out, always on time. Tony liked the order of it. He didn't care about luck or loss. What he cared about was rhythm. People trusted rhythms. They lived by them. If you could control a man's rhythm, you controlled the man. By 17, he was running errands that weren't called errands. He carried bags, stood watch at doors, collected debts. He never raised his voice. He never threatened. He just looked at you long enough for you to understand what would happen if you didn't fall in line. That stare was more final than a gun. And when the first body came, it wasn't a roar of violence, it was quiet, like everything else about him. Rain that night, always the rain. A dock, a parked car, a man in the passenger seat who'd skimmed a little too much for a little too long. Tony said 5 words, only 5, and then pulled the trigger. No speech, no anger. Just the rule. The water swallowed the weight without a splash. On the ride back, he cracked the window, let the damp air mix with the smoke of his cigar. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't grim either. It was business, and business had to keep moving. That's what made him different. Other men killed for rage, or pride, or ego. Tony killed for structure. He believed in rules. No drugs. No noise. No flash. He told his crew, noise brings heat. Heat melts the house. Keep the house standing. He built his world the way a mason lays bricks. Slowly, carefully, one on top of the other. Gambling rooms. Union deals. Warehouses that made money on paper but not a cent in reality. He didn't grab fast. He didn't shine bright. He let others flash their suits and chase headlines. He stayed in the shadows, letting the city forget him while still feeling his hand everywhere. When the papers finally printed his name, it wasn't because he wanted it. It was because others needed a face. Tony became the front boss, the man they could point to, while Vincent the Cingigani stayed behind the curtain. Tony didn't mind at first. He had the shoulders to take the heat. Cameras pointed at him meant they weren't pointing at the machine itself. But deals like that come with a price. The first insult was small. A contract he'd lined up got pulled last minute. No explanation, just a voice saying not this one. He let it slide. Then a younger soldier walked past him in a hallway without a nod. Small things. Small cracks. And Tony, who had spent his whole life keeping structures standing, felt the weight pressing harder. Still, he stuck to routine. The chop house on East Harlem, table by the window. Veal, same cut, same sauce. A cigar after, smoke curling toward the glass while he watched the reflections of the street. If someone came in too quick, he noticed. If a car idled too long, he marked it. Silence was still his weapon. One night, a kid strolled in, sunglasses at night, tapping fingers on the table, smiling too wide. He leaned toward Tony, nervous but trying to look calm. "You wanted me," the kid said. "I didn't say that," Tony replied. The kid's smile faltered. The two men at the back pretended to read menus. Outside, a bus hissed. The payphone across the street rang once, then stopped. Tony leaned forward, voice low but sharp as glass. "You know the rule about noise?" The kid swallowed. "No noise. No attention." "Good. Finish it." The kid blinked, unsure. "Be the man they forget to mention." Tony nodded once, then stabbed his fork into the veal. "Better." He chewed slow, eyes never leaving the kid. Outside, the rain started again, streaking the glass, turning the neon sign across the street into a blur of red and blue. The city had a way of repeating itself, like a record spinning the same track. And Tony knew the song wasn't finished. Because somewhere in that silence, he could feel the storm coming. The kid sat there across from me, his fingers still tapping faintly on the table like he hadn't even realized it. I watched the reflection of those fingers in the window more than I watched him. Rain outside blurred the glass, headlights cutting through like ghosts. That was always the trick, you learn more from the shadows than you do from a man's eyes. "You tap again," I said, "and you'll tap yourself into a grave." His fingers froze. He swallowed, nodded, tried to steady himself. "I understand." "No," I said. I cut into the veal, chewed slow. "You will. If you last." The waiter cleared the plates, head low. My men at the other table folded their menus, slipped out through the back. Routine. Always routine. I stood, brushed ash from my coat sleeve, and walked out. The kid followed 2 steps behind, like he was supposed to. Mikey already had the Lincoln idling at the curb. He opened the door, eyes scanning the street without moving his head. That was why I trusted him. He saw without showing he saw. We slid in. The leather creaked, the engine purred, the wipers dragged across the windshield, smearing rain into streaks. I told Mikey to drive slow, always slow. The city reveals itself in the crawl, never the sprint. Half a block up, a car idled at the corner. Too clean for this neighborhood, no rust, no dents, windows rolled up tight. The kind of car that doesn't belong but sits anyway. I didn't look twice. You never look twice at the ones who want to be seen. You let them think you're blind. That's how you outlive them. The kid leaned forward. "That car." "Sit back," I said. My tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. He sank into the seat, eyes on his shoes. We rolled past the corner store, the barber shop, the bakery where my father once stood at dawn with flour on his arms. Ghosts on every block. I lit a cigar, cracked the window an inch, let the damp air in. The city smelled like oil and onions, wet concrete and old steam pipes. That smell never left you. By the time we reached the brownstone, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. Mikey parked, scanned the street again, then nodded once. Clear enough. We went inside. The kid stood by the door like he wasn't sure if he should sit. I let him stand. A man learns more from standing than he does from sitting. I poured scotch, the glass sweating in my hand, and finally spoke. You saw that car? He nodded. Yes. You think it's watching us? Yes. I sipped slow, studied him. Wrong. That car wasn't watching us. It was waiting. There's a difference. Men who watch want to see. Men who wait already know what they're going to do. Learn the difference, or you won't live long enough to see another rain. He blinked, trying to take it in. His mouth opened like he wanted to ask more, but I lifted a finger and he shut it again. Good. Mikey took his usual seat by the window, cigar unlit, eyes on the street. His silence filled the room like furniture. I leaned back, lit my own cigar, and let the smoke curl. You want to learn? I asked the kid. Yes. Then watch. I didn't mean watch me. I meant watch everything. The crack in the wall plaster where the heat pipe ran. The way Mikey's eyes shifted every time a shadow moved outside. The rhythm of the record when I put it on low, the old jazz horn echoing off the corners. Watch it all until the city couldn't breathe without you noticing. That was the real skill. Not pulling a trigger. Not shouting orders. Watching. Hours passed like that. Rain stopped. The city quieted. Midnight came and went. Finally, I stood. Tomorrow, I said, you'll earn your shadow. He frowned. My what? Every man has a shadow, I said. A double. Someone who learns his steps so the day he disappears, the work doesn't stop. Tomorrow you'll meet yours. And you'll decide if you're worth having one. He nodded, though confusion still sat on his face. Get out, I told him. Go home. Don't talk to anyone on the way. Don't look back. And if someone calls your name, keep walking. He left without another word. His footsteps faded down the hall, down the steps, onto the wet street. Mikey watched him through the glass. You think he'll last? He asked finally. I drew smoke, let it sit in my lungs, then exhaled slow. If he learns to stop smiling at death, maybe. Mikey nodded once, nothing more. We sat in silence until the sky started to pale, the record long since stopped, the city waking again. By the next day, I knew the kid would face his first test. Not a killing. Not yet. Something smaller, but heavier in its way. A test of whether he could walk through a storm without leaving a ripple. Because in this life, men don't die from bullets first. They die from noise. And the kid was about to learn whether he could live in the silence. The next morning broke gray, the sky hanging low like it was holding its breath. I sat in my usual chair, coffee in a chipped mug, cigar smoke curling toward the ceiling. The newspaper lay folded but untouched. Headlines meant nothing to me anymore. I read the streets, not the ink. Mikey stood by the window, his usual post, eyes sweeping the block without moving his head. He could spot a tail in the reflection of a streetlight if he had to. That's why I trusted him. The kid came in on time. Not early, not late. His shoes were polished, his shirt pressed, but his eyes still carried that mix of nerves and fire. He tried to hide it, but nerves leave traces, the twitch in the jaw, the way he held his breath when he closed the door behind him. I lit another cigar and studied him through the smoke. Today you meet your shadow. He frowned, but didn't speak. He was learning. We drove slow through Harlem. The streets were slick, last night's rain still in the cracks, reflecting the neon signs in broken colors. A bus hissed at the corner, men shouted at each other over crates of fruit, women with bags of groceries hurried across puddles. To most it was noise. To me it was rhythm. The Lincoln crawled until we reached a laundromat with a flickering sign. The machines inside rattled like tired lungs. A woman folded sheets at the counter, her eyes fixed on the fabric, pretending not to notice us. In the back, two men sat. One older, broad shoulders, sharp eyes. The other younger, lean, face tight, restless. I motioned the kid forward. This one, I said, pointing to the older man. He's your shadow. His name doesn't matter right now. What matters is he knows your steps. The day you fall, he takes them for you. That's how the machine keeps turning. The kid nodded. And the younger one? I let smoke drift out before answering. That's the shadow's shadow. Because even shadows need someone ready to step in. This house doesn't fall if one wall cracks. Remember that. The kid glanced at them, then back at me. What do I do? You walk, I said. You walk your route. And he walks behind you. Not too close. Not too far. He learns you. If you stop, he stops. If you breathe heavy, he knows why. You teach him without words. Today, you don't just live your life, you prove it's worth repeating. We left the laundromat. The kid started down the block, his shadow 2 steps behind. I stayed in the car with Mikey, watching from across the street. The rain had started again, soft, steady, pattering against the windshield. Always the rain. The kid passed a fruit stand, nodded at the grocer, didn't linger. Good. He crossed at the corner, never looking over his shoulder, though I could tell he wanted to. His shadow mirrored him, smooth, unhurried. Halfway down the block, a man leaned against a lamppost. Not buying fruit, not waiting for a bus. Just standing, smoking too slow, eyes too sharp. I tapped the ash off my cigar. You see him? I asked Mikey. Yeah, Mikey said. He doesn't belong. No, Mikey agreed. The kid walked past, didn't flinch. The shadow didn't flinch either. They kept pace, steady, like the lamppost man wasn't even there. That was the test. You don't react to bait. You let the bait rot. But the man moved. He flicked his cigarette, stepped off the curb, started walking the same direction. Not close, but close enough. I cracked the window, let rain and smoke mix in the air. What do you think? I asked Mikey. Fed, he said. Maybe. Or a rival. Maybe. I smiled faintly. Doesn't matter. The reaction tells you more than the reason. The kid kept walking. His stride never broke. His shadow stayed smooth, steady. At the corner, the kid paused, looked at his watch, then crossed. The man didn't follow. He stopped, leaned on another pole, lit another cigarette. Watching. Waiting. I leaned back in the seat, exhaled smoke. He passed. Mikey nodded. The shadow too. When the kid came back, I let him stand in front of me, rain still dripping from his coat. His chest rose fast, but his eyes were calm. You saw him, I said. Yes. You looked at him? No. Good. That's the rule. If you look at the eyes, they own you. If you look at the ground, they know you're scared. If you keep moving, they learn nothing. That's how you stay breathing. He nodded. So what happens now? I poured scotch into 2 glasses, slid one across the table. Now you learn patience. Today was nothing. Tomorrow might be something. You'll never know which until you're already in it. He lifted the glass, drank too fast, coughed once. I shook my head. Control yourself. Even with whiskey. Especially with whiskey. Discipline in all things. You don't own yourself, you don't own anything. The record spun low in the corner, a horn moaning through the silence. The rain tapped at the window like fingers on glass. You think you're ready, I told him, but you're not. You'll know you're ready the day you don't care if you are. The kid sat quiet, eyes fixed on the table. Mikey stood at the window, cigar unlit, watching the street. The rhythm of the city never stopped. And then the phone rang. Not the one on the counter, the hidden one behind the bathroom tile. The one only 2 people had the number to. I stood, walked slow, lifted the receiver. I didn't speak. A voice on the other end said just 3 words. It's moving tonight. I hung up. The kid looked at me, waiting for explanation. I didn't give him one. Go home, I said. But. Go. He went. Mikey watched him leave, then turned back to me. What's moving? I lit another cigar, flame bright in the dim room, smoke curling like a ghost. Something that'll decide if the house still stands. Outside, the rain fell harder, streaking the glass until the streetlights looked like fire bleeding into water. And I knew the silence wouldn't hold much longer. The rain didn't stop that night. It came down in sheets, heavy and mean, beating against the windows like fists. I sat in the brownstone with the lights low, cigar burning steady, the record spinning a slow, moaning horn. Mikey was by the window, eyes on the street. Neither of us spoke. Silence wasn't just habit now, it was armor. It's moving tonight. Those 3 words had been chewing at me since the phone call. No names. No details. Just a message from a voice that never wasted words. That meant something big. Something heavy enough to shake the house if we weren't ready. By 9, the kid walked in. He closed the door softer this time, like he finally understood that noise travels. His coat was wet, his hair plastered to his forehead, but his eyes were steady. You called for me? He asked. I didn't answer right away. I poured 3 glasses of scotch, slid one to him, one to Mikey, and kept mine. I lit another cigar, let the smoke drift between us. You want to learn? I asked. Yes. Then listen. Tonight you don't speak unless I tell you. You don't move unless I move. You don't even breathe louder than me. Understand? He nodded. Yes. Good. Then you're coming with us. Mikey put out his cigar, grabbed his coat, and we headed out. The Lincoln sat at the curb, rain streaking its black skin, reflections of streetlights sliding across it like veins of fire. We got in. Mikey drove, I sat in the back, the kid beside me. The leather was cold, damp from our coats. Where are we going? The kid finally asked. To see if the house leaks, I said. The car rolled through Harlem slow, wipers smearing the rain. The city was alive even in the storm. Neon flickered over bars, steam rose from manholes, cops in ponchos leaned against squad cars, pretending to watch traffic. Every block carried whispers. Tonight, the whispers felt louder. We pulled near the river. Warehouses lined the block, rust on their teeth, shadows in their windows. Trucks idled, men moved crates under the cover of the rain. Too much movement for this time of night. Mikey killed the lights, parked 2 blocks away. We sat in silence, watching. You see it? I asked the kid. He squinted through the rain. Crates. Men loading. What else? He hesitated. A van. Too clean. Parked wrong. I nodded. Better. What else? His eyes scanned again. 2 men not working. Just standing. Talking without words. I cracked a small smile. Now you're watching. We got out, coats pulled tight, hats low. Rain hit hard on our shoulders, ran down our collars. We walked slow, like we belonged, like the storm was just another night. Men nodded at me as we passed, some looked away. They knew my face. We stopped under the awning of a warehouse. Mikey lit a cigarette, held it against the rain. I lit a cigar, the flame small and bright in the dark. The kid stood still, eyes forward, not twitching. Good. One of the men stepped forward, nervous energy rolling off him. Tony. Didn't expect you tonight. I exhaled smoke. That's the point. He shifted on his feet. We're just moving a few things. Nothing big. I looked past him at the crates. Too many for nothing big. Too organized. Too clean. Open one, I said. He froze. They're sealed. Open one. My voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. He waved at another man, who pried a crate with a crowbar. The lid came up with a groan. Inside, stacks of powder, wrapped tight in plastic. Cocaine. I drew long from the cigar, blew smoke into the rain. You know my rule. The man swallowed. Tony, it's not ours. Just passing through. No, I said, cutting him off. Nothing passes through Harlem without me knowing. Nothing. He stammered, it's Chin's. He cleared it. That name hung in the air heavier than the rain. Chin. Vincent Gigante. The ghost behind the curtain, the real hand on the wheel. If his name was on these crates, it meant this wasn't just a leak, it was a flood. I stepped closer, close enough for him to smell the cigar smoke on my breath. You think saying his name saves you? You think it changes the rule? His lips trembled. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice, I said. Mikey's hand slid into his coat pocket, calm, slow. The kid stood frozen, eyes wide but locked forward. He didn't flinch. That mattered. I tapped ash into the crate of powder, let it fall on the plastic wrap. This ends tonight. Every box, gone by morning. Or you're gone instead. Understand? The man nodded too fast, too eager. Yes, Tony. Yes. I stepped back, pulled my coat tighter. And if Chin has a problem with that, he can tell me himself. We turned and walked back into the rain. The kid stayed close, his shadow behind him still learning his steps. Mikey lit another cigarette, calm as ever. Back in the Lincoln, we sat dripping on the leather seats, silence thick between us. Finally, the kid spoke. That was his. Maybe, I said. What if he pushes back? I looked at him, cigar ember glowing in the dark. Then the storm hits harder. And we see who drowns. Mikey pulled the car away, headlights cutting through the sheets of rain. The city slid by, blurred and restless. At the brownstone, I poured another scotch, sat at the table, and let the silence hang. The kid stood by the door, waiting for me to say more. I didn't. He'd seen enough tonight. The look in his eyes told me the lesson had sunk in. When he finally left, Mikey turned from the window. You just made a line in the sand. I nodded. Lines are meant to be tested. And if he calls it? I puffed the cigar, let the smoke curl. Then the silence breaks. Outside, the rain hammered the city, drumming against the windows, streaking the glass until the streetlights looked like blood. And I knew that by morning, Harlem would either still be mine, or it would belong to the storm. The rain hadn't stopped by morning. It clung to the streets, dripping off fire escapes, pooling in potholes, making the city shine like black glass. I sat in my chair with the chipped mug in my hand, cigar smoke curling above me. The record spun soft in the corner, a low hum of jazz filling the silence. Mikey stood at the window, as steady as ever. He hadn't said much since the night at the river. He didn't need to. His silence told me enough, he was waiting to see what the city would do. The kid walked in, on time again, eyes sharper than the day before. He closed the door without a sound, coat dripping on the mat. He stood waiting. You heard anything? I asked him. He shook his head. Only whispers. Men saying you burned a bridge. I took a slow pull from the cigar. Good. Let them whisper. Whispers mean they're scared. Scared men don't move too fast. He hesitated. What if it wasn't just a bridge? What if it was a wall? I leaned forward, eyes on his. Then we see if the wall falls on me or on them. The silence stretched. The rain tapped against the glass like fingers. Mikey finally turned from the window. We'll know by tonight. He was right. This life never left questions hanging long. By midday, we were in the Lincoln, crawling through Harlem. The streets carried tension you could taste. Men stood in doorways too long. Conversations cut off when we passed. Even the shopkeepers looked nervous, their eyes darting like they expected someone else to walk in after us. At the chop house, the same table waited by the window. I lit a cigar, ordered the veal, and let the room fill with smoke. Men came in one by one. They nodded, dropped envelopes, sat for a drink, then left. Routine. Always routine. That's how you tested the storm. You stuck to your rhythm and waited to see who flinched first. Halfway through the meal, the door opened. Not one of mine. A messenger. Young, thin, rain dripping off his hat. He stood frozen just inside the door, eyes darting. The room went quiet. I waved him over. He stepped quick, handed me a folded note, then vanished back into the rain without a word. I unfolded it. 4 words, written in a steady hand, "This isn't your call." I burned the note with the tip of my cigar, let the ash fall into the plate. I didn't speak. The kid's eyes followed the flame, but he knew better than to ask. Mikey didn't even blink. We finished the meal, walked out into the rain, slid back into the Lincoln. I lit another cigar, cracked the window, let the damp air mix with the smoke. "You saw the note," I said to the kid. He nodded. "What did it mean?" He hesitated. "That Chin's making the rules now." I shook my head. "No. Chin always made the rules. The note means he's tired of pretending I don't notice." The kid frowned. "So what happens next?" I blew smoke out the window, watched it twist into the rain. "Next, we see how loud he wants to get." The car rolled slow, rain streaking across the windshield. At a corner, I spotted the same van from 2 nights before. Too clean. Parked wrong. Same mistake. Men inside pretending they weren't there. "They're still watching," the kid said. "Good," I told him. "Let them. A man who watches too long gets tired eyes. Tired eyes make mistakes." We drove on, past the bakery, past the tailor shop, past the stoops where I had learned the rhythm of the streets. The city hadn't changed, not really. Just the faces. Different men making the same mistakes, thinking their story was new. Back at the brownstone, I poured scotch. The kid finally asked the question sitting in his chest. "Why do you let him stay behind the curtain? Why take the heat for him?" I looked at him through the smoke. "Because that's the deal. Every house needs a wall. I'm the wall. He's the hand behind it. It's the only way the roof stays standing. But if the wall cracks, I cut him off. Then the house falls. And everyone inside it drowns." He went quiet. He was starting to understand. Not the whole truth, not yet, but enough to feel the weight. That night, I sat alone with the record spinning low. The kid had gone, Mikey at his post by the window. I thought about the note. "This isn't your call." I'd lived my whole life by rules, silence, structure, discipline. I had carried the weight so the machine kept turning. But rules mean nothing if the men who write them decide to change the script. And I could feel it now, the script was shifting. The rain hammered harder, drumming against the glass until the streetlights blurred into streaks of red and yellow. Mikey lit a cigar, his face hidden in the glow. "They're going to test you," he said. I nodded. "They already have. And when they come harder?" I leaned back, let the smoke curl above me. "Then we show them silence isn't weakness. It's a weapon." Outside, the city pulsed, restless, hungry. Inside, the silence wrapped around us like armor. And I knew by morning, the whispers would either fade, or they'd turn into thunder. Morning came with no rain, just a heavy gray sky that pressed down on the city. The streets were slick, shining from the night before, steam rising from sewer grates like the ground itself was breathing. Harlem was restless. Men gathered on corners too early, whispers passing quicker than the buses that hissed at the stops. Everyone felt it, even if they didn't know what it was. I sat in my chair, coffee cooling in the chipped mug, cigar smoke curling toward the ceiling. The record spun low in the corner, a steady horn holding the silence together. Mikey stood at the window as always, watching, waiting. He hadn't said a word since last night. He didn't need to. His silence told me he was bracing for what was coming. The kid walked in, sharp again, on time, clean shoes, pressed shirt. He was trying to look steady, but his shoulders betrayed him. Shoulders always tell the truth. "You heard?" I asked. He nodded. "People saying you stepped over. That chin's not happy." I puffed smoke, let it drift between us. He was never happy. Happy men don't build empires. He hesitated. "So what happens now?" I leaned forward, eyes steady on his. "Now we find out if silence still scares them, or if they've forgotten what it means." We rode in the Lincoln, slow as always. The city showed itself in the crawl. The kid sat quiet beside me, Mikey's hands steady on the wheel. As we passed 116th, I noticed eyes in every doorway. Men standing, pretending to talk, pretending not to stare. Too many. Too obvious. "They're watching," the kid whispered. "Good," I said. "Let them." At the chop house, my table was waiting. Same seat by the window, same plate, same cigar. Routine. You never break routine when the storm comes, it's the only anchor you've got. Men filed in, dropped envelopes, made small talk about weather and ball games. But their eyes betrayed them. Wide, darting. They were waiting for me to flinch. Halfway through the meal, the door opened. Not one of mine. A messenger again. Not the thin boy from yesterday, this one older, heavier, eyes too calm. He walked straight to my table, dropped an envelope, and left without a word. I opened it. Inside was a single playing card. The King of Spades. On the back, scrawled in neat ink, "Sit down tonight. Or don't get up again." I let the cigar ash fall onto the card, burning a black mark across the crown. The kid's eyes followed every move, waiting for me to explode. I didn't. We finished the meal. I paid the check like I always did. We left. Back in the Lincoln, Mikey drove us uptown, the streets quieter than usual. The kid finally spoke. "What does it mean?" I held the card up, let him see the burn mark. "It means the game isn't mine anymore. It means the hand's already been dealt." "So what do you do?" I cracked the window, let rainless air mix with smoke. "I don't fold." The kid swallowed, sat back. Mikey drove without a word. We reached the brownstone just as the sky darkened again. The city was bracing for more rain. It always came back, like a record spinning the same track over and over. I poured scotch, sat at the table, let the kid stand across from me. "You know why they send cards?" I asked him. He shook his head. "Because cards tell stories. Kings, queens, jokers. They're symbols. They don't need names. A man can burn a card and still sleep at night. Burning a name, that wakes ghosts. That's why Chin uses cards. He never says my name. He doesn't have to." The kid frowned. "So tonight?" "Tonight," I said, "we sit. Same table. Same cigar. Same silence. And we see who blinks." He looked nervous, but he didn't argue. That was something. By nightfall, the rain returned. Heavy, steady, drumming against the glass, soaking the streets until the neon lights bled into puddles. The Lincoln rolled through it, wipers dragging slow. Mikey drove us to the chop house. Inside, the air was thicker than usual. Men at the bar whispered but didn't look. My table was set. I sat, lit a cigar, let the smoke rise slow. The kid sat across from me. Mikey stood by the wall, eyes on the door. Minutes stretched. The only sound was the rain outside and the faint crackle of the cigar. Then the door opened. 3 men walked in. Not mine. Suits too sharp, shoes too clean, eyes too cold. They didn't order. They didn't nod. They just walked to the table and stood. The lead one spoke. His voice was calm, almost polite. "Tony. Chin says it's time." I took a long pull from the cigar, blew smoke across the table. Time for what? You to step aside. Quietly. Cleanly. No noise. I let the silence hang. The kid's eyes darted between us. Mikey's hand slipped into his coat, slow and steady. Finally, I said, I've been quiet my whole life. But don't mistake silence for surrender. The man didn't blink. Then don't mistake warning for mercy. We stared at each other, the rain hammering the windows, the city holding its breath. I tapped ash into the tray, set the cigar down, and leaned forward. My voice was low, steady. Tell him this, if he wants me gone, he'll have to say my name. Out loud. Until then, the house still stands. The man's jaw tightened. He nodded once, turned, and left. The other two followed. The door shut behind them. The room stayed silent. The kid exhaled like he'd been holding his breath the whole time. Mikey lit his cigar, calm as ever. I picked mine back up, drew smoke, and said, the storm's here. And outside, the rain poured harder, streaking the glass until the city blurred into shadows. The storm didn't end when those men left the chop house. It followed us into the night, heavier than the rain, heavier than the silence. Mikey drove slow, wipers dragging across the windshield, headlights cutting through sheets of water. The kid sat stiff in the back seat beside me, his shoulders tight, his jaw clenched like he was chewing on questions he didn't dare ask. Back at the brownstone, I poured scotch, sat at the table, and lit another cigar. The kid stood waiting, still wired from what he'd seen. Mikey took his usual post by the window, watching the street. You're thinking too loud, I told the kid. He frowned. What happens now? You told them no. I drew smoke, let it curl into the dim light. You don't say no in this life. You just don't say yes. The difference keeps you breathing. He nodded, though I knew he didn't fully understand. Understanding took years. Years he might not have. The next morning, the whispers started. They carried on the streets like the rain, seeping into every corner, dripping into every doorway. Men on stoops said Chin had spoken. Not loud, not in the open, but enough. Enough for people to start leaning away from me when I passed. Enough for shopkeepers to close their doors early, pretending it was weather. By noon, the feds showed their face too. Not in raids, not in cuffs, just cars parked wrong, men in coats too clean, notebooks in their pockets, eyes sharp as knives. They followed the Lincoln, not close, not far. They wanted me to see them. They wanted me to know the net was tightening. Mikey kept driving slow, never breaking pace. They're not hiding anymore, he said. They don't need to, I replied. They think the house is cracking. The kid shifted in his seat. Is it? I turned to him, smoke drifting from my cigar. The house only cracks if you believe the whispers. The moment you start listening, it's already fallen. We rolled past the bakery, past the tailor, past the corner where I had first seen Dice hit brick as a boy. Ghosts in every doorway. But the living ones were worse. Their eyes said what their mouths didn't, they were waiting to see if I'd drown. That night, back at the chop house, the room was thinner. Fewer men came. Envelopes were lighter. Some didn't show at all. Silence had always been my weapon, but now their silence was a weapon too. They were testing me without moving a finger. Halfway through the meal, the kid leaned in. Should we send a message? Something loud? I set my fork down, stared at him until he shifted in his seat. Loud is for men who want to be remembered. Quiet is for men who want to be obeyed. You make noise, you get headlines. Headlines fade. Fear doesn't. He nodded, embarrassed. He still had too much hunger in him. Hunger kills more men than bullets. The door opened again. Another messenger. Always messengers. This one carried no envelope, no card, just words. He walked to the table, leaned down, and whispered in my ear. They'll be at the club tomorrow. Midnight. If you don't show, they'll decide without you. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just kept chewing, slow and steady. The man straightened, walked out into the rain. The kid's eyes burned with questions. Mikey's face stayed stone. What did he say? The kid finally asked. I wiped my mouth with the napkin, lit another cigar, and said, tomorrow, we sit with the storm. The next day stretched long. The feds stayed close, their cars shadowing us through Harlem, their eyes always on me. The streets stayed restless. Men who once nodded now stared at the ground. Even the grocer who always slipped me a free orange wouldn't meet my eyes. By nightfall, the Lincoln rolled through the rain again. Mikey drove, calm as ever. The kid sat beside me, his hand twitching on his knee. I lit a cigar, cracked the window, let the smoke mix with the damp air. You nervous? I asked him. He shook his head too quick. No. Then you'll die faster than the ones who admit it, I said. Fear keeps you sharp. Fear makes your eyes see what pride blinds. He swallowed, sat back. Mikey drove without comment. We pulled up outside the club. Not the Chop House, not a corner cafe, a club with neon bleeding across the wet sidewalk, music thumping behind the walls. Too loud for me. But that was the point. They wanted me out of my rhythm. They wanted me where the silence couldn't follow. Inside, smoke hung heavy, music pounding, glasses clinking. Men filled the back room, suits sharp, eyes sharper. And at the center of the table, the empty chair waited. I sat. The kid stood behind me, Mikey by the wall. No one spoke at first. The music outside thumped through the walls, a heartbeat too fast. Finally, one of them leaned forward. Tony. Chin says the house needs a new wall. I puffed smoke, exhaled slow. Walls don't get replaced because someone doesn't like the paint. He smirked. This isn't paint. This is cracks. I leaned in, my voice low but sharp. The house stands because I built it on silence. You think you can hold it with noise? Try it. See how fast it burns. The room went still. Eyes shifted. Some away from me, some toward. The kid's breathing hitched, but he stayed silent. Mikey's hand rested on the inside of his coat. Another man spoke, softer this time. Then sit quiet. But don't think quiet means safe. I tapped ash into the tray, set the cigar down, and stood. Safe is for men who live small. I never lived small. I turned, walked out, Mikey and the kid behind me. The rain hit us like a curtain, washing the smoke from my coat. The Lincoln was waiting. We slid in, leather damp, engine low. The kid finally spoke. You just told them no again. No, I said. I told them silence still belongs to me. Mikey lit his cigar, eyes on the wet street. They won't stop here. I know, I said. Outside, the city blurred through the rain, restless, waiting. Inside, the silence wrapped tight around us. And I knew the storm wasn't just circling anymore. It was coming straight through the door. The rain was still falling when we left the club. It hammered the sidewalks, dripped from fire escapes, washed the neon signs into red and blue rivers across the pavement. Mikey pulled the Lincoln up, headlights cutting through the storm. I slid in without a word, cigar clenched between my teeth. The kid followed, his face pale but his jaw set. We drove slow through Harlem. The city was quieter than usual, like even the rain had pressed the sound out of it. Curtains twitched. Shadows leaned in doorways, watching, waiting. The whispers weren't whispers anymore. They were eyes. Eyes everywhere. By the time we reached the brownstone, the silence inside felt heavier than the storm outside. I poured scotch, let the glass sweat in my hand. Mikey took his post by the window. The kid stood stiff, waiting for me to speak. You saw their faces, I said. He nodded. They want you gone. They always did, I said, puffing smoke. The difference is now they think they can do it. He hesitated. And can they? I leaned back, eyes steady on his. Only if I let them. The record spun low in the corner, jazz horns moaning like ghosts in the dark. The kid shifted, restless. He was still young enough to think action solved everything. But I knew better. Noise brings heat. Heat melts the house. Silence keeps it standing. The next morning, the feds came louder. Not with cuffs. Not yet. With presence. 2 cars sat across from the brownstone, too clean for Harlem. Men in coats leaned against them, sipping coffee, pretending to talk. One had a notebook, flipping pages without looking down. They weren't hiding anymore. They wanted me to know they were there. Mikey scanned them from the window. They'll be here every day now. Good, I said. If they're outside, I know where they are. It's when they vanish you need to worry. The kid frowned. Why don't we shake them? Lose them? I looked at him through the smoke. Because you don't shake ghosts. You let them think they're haunting you while you haunt them back. He nodded, though I could see the confusion. Understanding silence takes years. He was still in his first storm. That afternoon, we drove through Harlem. The Lincoln rolled slow, wipers dragging across the glass. The feds tailed us, a car length behind, headlights steady. On the sidewalks, men avoided eye contact, shopkeepers closed their doors early, even the grocer who once slipped me fruit turned his back. The city itself was leaning away. At the chop house, the room was thinner than before. Only a handful of men came. The envelopes were lighter, hands shaking as they laid them down. Fear was spreading faster than the rain. Halfway through the meal, the door opened. Not a messenger this time. An old face. A man who had once eaten at my table, once kissed my ring. Now his eyes darted like a trapped rat. He sat across from me, nervous, fingers twitching on the table. Tony, he whispered, voice shaking. They're saying you don't have the chin's blessing anymore. They're saying you're on your own. I puffed smoke, exhaled slow. And what are you saying? He swallowed hard. I'm saying maybe it's time, maybe it's safer to step aside. The kid's jaw clenched, ready to explode. I shot him a look, and he froze. Silence. Always silence. I leaned across the table, my voice low but sharp. The day you let whispers decide your steps is the day you're already buried. You want to step aside, step. But don't expect the house to follow. His eyes dropped. He slid an envelope across the table, lighter than it should have been. Then he left, shoulders hunched, coat pulled tight. The kid spoke as soon as the door closed. He's with them now. Maybe, I said. Maybe not. Doesn't matter. Men like him don't last. They blow with the wind. And the wind never carries cowards far. We finished the meal. Routine, even when the room was crumbling. Especially then. That night, back at the brownstone, I sat with my scotch, cigar burning low, record spinning soft. Mikey stood at the window, eyes on the Fed cars outside. The kid paced the room, restless. Why don't you fight back? He burst out finally. Why not send a message, make them scared again? I stared at him through the smoke. Because fear from noise fades. Fear from silence stays. Men forget what you say. They never forget how you watch. He sank into the chair across from me, frustrated but silent. That was progress. The hours dragged. Midnight came, rain still hammering the windows. Then the phone rang. Not the one on the desk. The hidden one, behind a tile in the bathroom. The one only 2 men had the number to. I answered without speaking. A voice on the other end said 5 words, "They're coming. Tonight. Be ready." I hung up, poured another scotch, and lit a fresh cigar. The kid's eyes widened. Who was it? What did they say? I blew smoke into the air. It doesn't matter who. What matters is the storms at the door. Mikey left the window, checked his coat, his pistol, then returned to his post. His silence told me enough, he was ready. The kid swallowed hard. What do we do? I leaned back, let the smoke curl above me, listened to the rain drumming against the glass. We do what we've always done, I said. We sit. We wait. And we see who blinks. Outside, the Fed cars stayed parked, their silhouettes blurred by the rain. Inside, the silence wrapped around us like armor. And I knew the night would decide whether silence still belonged to me, or whether the storm would finally break it. The phone call still echoed in the room, even after the line went dead. They're coming. Tonight. 5 words, no details. Enough to change the air. The kid stood frozen by the table, his face pale, hands clenched. Mikey moved with the same calm he always did, checked his pistol, adjusted his coat, returned to the window. Outside, the rain poured harder, hammering the glass until the streetlights blurred into streaks of fire. I poured another scotch, lit a fresh cigar, and sat. The smoke rose slow, curling toward the ceiling. My silence filled the room. That silence wasn't just habit. It was message. It said, we don't run. We don't shout. We wait. The kid couldn't hold it in. Shouldn't we leave? Slip out before they get here? I blew smoke, eyes steady on him. You don't outrun rain. It falls wherever you go. He swallowed, sank into a chair. Mikey glanced back from the window, gave him a look that said everything, sit still, learn. Minutes dragged like hours. The record spun in the corner, its horn moaning low, almost drowned out by the storm outside. Then headlights cut through the rain. 2. Then 3. Cars pulled up across the street, too clean, too sharp. Doors opened. Men stepped out, coats pulled tight, hats low. They moved with purpose. Mikey didn't flinch. They're here. I drew long from the cigar, let the smoke sit in my lungs, exhaled slow. Let them knock. And knock they did. Heavy. Not polite. The kind of knock that said they weren't asking. The kid jolted in his chair, his breath loud in the silence. Mikey stayed stone. The knock came again, harder this time. A voice followed. Anthony Salerno. Federal agents. Open up. I stood, joints stiff, coat heavy on my shoulders. I set the cigar in the tray, sipped the last of the scotch, and walked slow to the door. I didn't hurry. You never hurry for men who want you to. I opened it. Rain and cold air swept in. 6 men stood there, dark coats, hard faces. Behind them, more weighted by the cars, their silhouettes blurred in the storm. The lead one held up papers, voice sharp. Anthony Salerno, you're under arrest. Racketeering, extortion, conspiracy. You know the list. I didn't answer. Didn't argue. I just held his stare, silence heavier than his words. He stepped forward, pulled the cuffs. His hands were rougher than they needed to be. I didn't flinch. A man who flinches feeds them. Behind me, the kid stood frozen. His eyes burned with something between fear and rage. Mikey stayed at the window, calm as ever, cigar smoke curling around his head. They cuffed me, hands behind my back, cold steel biting my wrists. I looked once at the kid. Just once. His jaw clenched, his shoulders trembling. I gave him a look that said more than words ever could, remember the silence. Carry it. They led me down the steps. Rain poured heavy, soaking my coat, running down my hat brim. Neighbors peeked through curtains, some bold enough to stand on the stoop. Some crossed themselves. Some smirked. Harlem loved a show, and the feds gave them one. Flashbulbs exploded when they shoved me into the car. Reporters shouted my name, calling me boss, kingpin, front man. I kept my eyes forward, face still. They wanted noise. I gave them nothing. The ride downtown was slow, sirens cutting through the rain, cars pulling aside like the city itself was making room. I watched the blur of Harlem through the wet glass. The bakery, the tailor, the stoops where boys still rolled dice under the cover of doorways. All of it slipping past, unreachable now. At the courthouse, the lights were brighter, the cameras thicker. They paraded me through like a prize catch, their voices sharp, their pens scratching. Fat Tony, they called me. The boss. The front. I let them talk. They could have their headlines. Headlines fade. Silence doesn't. The cell was cold, concrete walls sweating, steel bars humming when they slammed shut. I sat on the cot, cuffs gone now but weight still heavy. The hum of voices carried down the block, men shouting, laughing, crying. Noise everywhere. I leaned back, closed my eyes, let the noise fade. In my mind, I was back in Harlem. Back on 115th, smelling roasted chestnuts, hearing dice hit brick, watching neon bleed into puddles. The city never left you. Even when it turned its back, even when it chained you, it was still yours. Days blurred into weeks. The feds moved fast. The commission trial. My name in every paper, my face on every screen. They said I was boss, Don, the one who pulled strings. I didn't argue. Let them believe it. That was the point of being the wall, you take the heat, so the hand behind the curtain stays in the dark. Mikey came to visit. Same eyes, same silence. He told me little. Just enough. Collections steady. Crews disciplined. The house still standing. His voice said nothing. His eyes said everything. The kid came too. Not as often. But enough. Each time he looked older. His shoulders straighter, his voice lower, his eyes colder. One day he sat across from me, hands folded, eyes steady. They say you're finished. That you'll never walk out again. I puffed smoke, exhaled slow. Good. Let them. Men stop watching when they think the show's over. That's when you move. He nodded. But there was hunger in his eyes. Too much hunger. I wondered if he understood silence yet, or if he was already thinking of noise. The guard tapped the glass. Time up. The kid stood, lingered 1 second longer, then left. That night, in the cell, I pulled the notebook from under the cot. Not confessions. Not regrets. Rules. Silence. Structure. Discipline. Over and over, written like prayers. I wrote them again, slow, steady. Not for me. For whoever needed them after. The rain outside beat against the small barred window, steady as a drum. And I knew my story wasn't about headlines or trials or names in the paper. It was about whether the silence would outlast me. Winter came hard. Cold seeped through the stone walls of Springfield Prison, sharper than anything Harlem ever threw at me. The radiator hissed, but it never warmed the cell. Nights dragged long. The hum of voices in the block never stopped, men laughing too loud, others crying into pillows, some shouting names nobody remembered. Noise everywhere. But in my corner, I kept the same silence that had carried me all my life. The doctors came often. Their faces gave more away than their words. Blood pressure, heart, age, they spoke in terms I didn't care for. I'd lived too long already. Men like me weren't meant to see gray hair, weren't meant to sit in cots writing rules on scraps of paper. But I was still here, breathing, waiting. Mikey visited when he could. He sat across the glass, coat on, eyes steady, the same silence he'd always carried. He never wasted words. Just said enough, the house still stood, collections still made, crews still disciplined. He didn't name names. He didn't need to. The way he looked at me told me more than reports ever could. The kid came too. He wasn't a kid anymore. His shoulders were broader, his eyes colder. The nervous tapping hands were gone. He stood taller, spoke less. He carried himself like a man who'd walked through rain and learned to keep his coat dry. One day he sat across from me, leaned close to the glass. They call me boss now. I studied him, smoke drifting in the stale air. Do you want it? He hesitated, then shook his head. No. But it keeps the machine turning. Good, I said. Never chase the crown. It's heavier than it looks. He nodded. For the first time, I felt something close to pride. Maybe he'd outlast the noise. Maybe he'd keep the silence alive. Back in my cell, I pulled the notebook from under the mattress. The pages were filled now, rules, reminders, silence written over and over. Not history. Not confession. Just anchors. I wrote the last words steady: silence is survival. Noise is death. Be the man they forget to mention. The days blurred. My body slowed. Walking to the yard felt like climbing a mountain. Breathing came heavy, my chest tight. Still, I lit a cigar when I could, even if the guards frowned. If the smoke killed me, it was only finishing a job the streets had started decades ago. One night, the pain came sharp. Sharp enough to bring the doctors running, sharp enough to make guards shout. They strapped wires to me, pressed cold stethoscopes against my chest, called my name like it mattered. I didn't answer. I wasn't in prison anymore. I was back in Harlem. Back on 115th Street, hearing dice clatter against brick. Back at the bakery, the smell of bread and smoke mixing. Back in the chop house, my table by the window, cigar glowing, rain streaking the glass. Back in the Lincoln, leather creaking, Mikey steady at the wheel. Back in the brownstone, jazz spinning low while the city whispered outside. Every sound. Every face. Every silence I'd ever carried, it all came back at once. The lights above me flickered. The doctors shouted. The machines beeped. And then even that noise faded. Silence. Pure. Heavy. Familiar. Anthony Fat Tony Salerno was gone. But the silence lived on. The house didn't fall that night. The city didn't stop breathing. Harlem still pulsed, restless, hungry. Envelopes still moved. Rules still held. Men still whispered his name, but only long enough to remind each other why silence mattered. The kid sat at the brownstone table now, scotch in his hand, cigar smoke curling toward the ceiling. Mikey still stood at the window, eyes on the street. The record spun low, the horn steady. Routine lived. Structure stood. And when the rain hammered the glass, streaking the streetlights into rivers of red and yellow, the kid didn't flinch. He just leaned back, steady, letting the silence wrap around him like armor. The legacy wasn't headlines. It wasn't crowns. It wasn't trials or names in the paper. The legacy was the silence. The legacy was the house still standing when the rain never stopped. That's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell icon, and share this video with someone who loves true gangster history. And don't forget, drop a comment below and tell me which mobster or crime story you'd like me to cover next. Your suggestion could be the next video on this channel.